I've been using Sony cameras since the very first Sony Alpha 7 and I'm recording this video with an a7 IV. So I was especially excited about the Sony Xperia 1.7, the new flagship phone which costs a hefty 1,500 euros. It's unclear if it will go on sale in the US yet. As a Sony fan, my expectations were very high. Also because Sony builds almost all the good camera sensors for other brands. But I compared it in detail with the iPhone 16 Pro and Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra and found some problems with Sony. Let's start with a deep dive into the cameras. The Xperia 1.7 has 3 cameras on the back. The main camera offers 48 megapixels, an aperture of f1.9 and a focal length of 24mm. The telephoto camera is especially exciting because it works with a variable focal length of 85 to 170mm, offers 12 megapixels and an aperture between f2.3 and 3.5. New compared to the previous model is the ultra wide angle camera with 48 megapixels, f2.0 aperture and 16mm focal length. On the front, there's a 12 megapixel front camera with f2.0 and 24mm. All rear cameras support both JPEG and RAW, as well as video recording in 4K up to 120p. I really like that the interface in the Photo Pro and Video Pro modes is almost identical to professional Sony cameras like my a7 IV. If you're familiar with these cameras, you will feel right at home. ISO, shutter speed, focus, white balance, everything can be set manually. That's really fun and gives the smartphone a bit of a mirrorless camera feeling. I even did long exposures and put ND filters on the cameras. For photographers, the interface is truly great. I think that the photos look really good overall, but in direct comparison to the flagships from Apple and Samsung, the results aren't always that good. Let's first compare the main cameras with standard settings on all 3. In direct comparison to the iPhone 16 Pro, that one has slightly more details in daylight, really just a little, but the Sony shows nicer colors. Samsung offers similar details. At night, the iPhone clearly has more detail, but again, the Sony has nicer colors. That's a matter of taste, of course. I find it quite unfortunate that you can only take RAW photos with 12 megapixels on the Xperia. On Samsung, you can choose 200 megapixels and they show clearly more detail than Sony, noticeably more. The iPhone 16 Pro with its 48 megapixels also takes more detailed RAW photos. By the way, that's for shots in good light. As soon as the ISO rises, the advantage disappears. The 12 megapixel Samsung photos then have just as much or little detail as Sony. At night, the main cameras of Sony and Apple have roughly the same amount of detail. On the Xperia, there's more noise, and again, I think it has nicer colors. Apple apparently reduces the noise even in RAW. The ultra wide angle camera from Sony is really nice. It's also the only new one compared to the previous model. It shows noticeably more detail than the iPhone 16 Pro and S25 Ultra and produces less noise in dark areas of the image. But the Sony ultra wide isn't quite as wide as Apple's and Samsung's. If you want to get as much as possible into the shot, that's harder with the Xperia. In RAW format, Samsung actually shows slightly more detail than Sony. You can shoot 50 megapixel photos, which you can't do on the Xperia. I find the Xperia's telephoto camera quite disappointing. The iPhone 16 Pro with its 5x zoom shows noticeably more detail and sharper images in JPEG mode, both compared to the 85 and 170mm zoom, even though the 170mm should be better on paper. But Samsung also offers more detail than Sony, and that applies to RAW files too. I think that's really a shame, especially RAW photos with a telephoto often don't look sharp at all. The detail is there, but it's not sharp. The front camera takes really good shots overall, but unfortunately you can't shoot in RAW here. With video, the Xperia 1.7 shows its strength. All rear cameras can record in 4K up to 120p, so you can even shoot slow motion with the telephoto camera. What I especially liked is the S-Cinetone color profile, which we know from professional Sony cameras. It gives a more cinematic look. Unfortunately, Sony doesn't support S-Log, which is a shame. I recorded this short film in 4K 120p with Cinetone and turned it into a slow motion from the 120p footage. I think you saw that the telephoto camera, just like in RAW photos, isn't particularly sharp. The detail is there, but it looks blurry. Yes, I also compared videos with the other two competitors. Again, the telephoto videos from Apple and Samsung are noticeably sharper. I recorded all tests in 4K 60p with standard settings. With the ultra wide, we again see that the Sony isn't that wide. Also, the other two are again a bit sharper. Same thing with the main camera. I think Sony just doesn't sharpen as much as Samsung and Apple do. A lot of filmmakers criticize that about smartphones. You could of course sharpen the Sony videos in post if you want. So you've seen that the cameras are overall good, but not as good as I expected, and often not as good as those from the flagships by Apple and Samsung. As a Sony fan, I'm quite disappointed because I expected top quality here, but that's not the case. For some filmmakers, the Xperia still might be interesting, but the iPhone can also shoot in ProRes. Let's move on to the design of the Xperia 1.7. It weighs 197 grams and is 8.2mm thick and comes in green, purple and black. The back is made of textured glass that doesn't show fingerprints and feels nice and grippy. The device barely slips in the hand and overall feels rugged. The frame is ribbed and, according to Sony, made of metal. It feels more like plastic. I was convinced for a long time that it was plastic. But it's metal, very grippy, but doesn't feel very high quality to me. Sony offers many ports that are rare these days. A 3.5mm headphone jack, a microSD card slot, USB-C 3.2 with display output, dual SIM support and a dedicated camera button. What I find especially cool is that you can open the SIM and microSD tray without a tool. You can just pull it out with your fingernail. Perfect if you want to import footage from a GoPro or save smartphone photos to the microSD and then edit them on a PC. There's a fingerprint reader built into the power button which works very fast and reliably. We get a 6.5-inch OLED with a resolution of 1080 by 2340 pixels and 120 Hz. The display is very bright, offers high contrast and beautiful colors. It's really fun to watch YouTube or movies on it. Compared to the S25 Ultra, the Sony display is brighter in standard mode. With Samsung, you have to enable the maximum brightness in settings, then both are roughly the same. The stereo speakers are also very good. They are loud, clear and have high sound quality. Compared to Samsung, there's slightly less brilliance in the highs, but overall it's a very good setup. Inside is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset. You also get 12GB of RAM and a 256GB of internal storage. In Geekbench 6, it scores slightly higher than the Xiaomi 15, which has the same chip. Against the Galaxy S25 Ultra with a higher clocked Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy, it's a little bit behind. The results in 3D Mark are very similar. Those mainly test graphics performance. In real life, it was always very fast, it never lagged and was always smooth. That's exactly how it should be with this chip. Fortnite runs at 90 FPS with epic graphics and 100% 3D resolution, super smooth. The frame rate stays stable even when playing for a long time with the highest settings. However, the frame does get quite warm. Call of Duty Warzone Mobile also runs very well. It gets warm here too, but not critically. The Xiaomi 15 overheated in my test, but that didn't happen here. I had the most fun with Asphalt Legends, especially because I bought a new controller. Racing games or Fortnite are way more fun with a gamepad. As always, I'll link the accessories in the description. Asphalt Legends, by the way, also runs well on weaker hardware. It comes with Android 15 pre-installed with Sony's own interface on top. I read in the comments that some people think the interface design looks outdated. Baby, but I don't mind it at all. Sony promises 4 years of major Android updates and 6 years of security updates. That's solid, though not quite on the same level as Samsung or Apple. The Xperia 1.7 has a 5000 mAh battery. In real life use, it easily lasts 2 days with normal use. But if you take a lot of photos and videos, 1 day is more realistic. In our standardized battery test, it reached a runtime of 24 hours and 40 minutes. For this, we always loop an HD video on YouTube at maximum brightness. The Sony Xperia 1.7 has some really cool features. Especially great are the 3.5mm headphone jack, the useful microSD slot with tool-free access, and the bright high contrast display. Also, the camera interface makes it interesting for Sony fans. If you need these features, it's a good smartphone. But if not, I see no reason to choose the Xperia 1.7 over the iPhone 16 Pro or Samsung S25 Ultra. The latter gets updates for longer, and especially the Samsung is now cheaper. I'm disappointed with the cameras. Sure, you can take good photos with them, but in direct comparison, the iPhone and S25 Ultra often are better. Sometimes slightly, sometimes significantly, especially in RAW. By the way, it doesn't always have to be a new flagship phone. In one of our recent videos, we compared what's more worthwhile, a used flagship or a new budget phone. Especially if cameras matter to you, the results will be very interesting.